Hello everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the second webinar of the brand new Global Young Leader Dialogue, GYLD. On December 15, just yesterday, this new initiative organized by the Center for China and Globalization and the Academy of Contemporary China and World Studies has successfully been launched. With more than 200 on-site and a staggering number of more than 140,000 online attendees. On-site speakers included the Excellencies Nicolas Chapuis, Ambassador of the Delegation of the European Union to China, Marielsa Oliveira, Director and Representative of UNESCO Beijing, Dominique Barton, Canada's Ambassador to China. The event also saw strong participation of the business community and all other relevant sectors of civil society. There have been messages of welcome and strong support to this new important global initiative by ways of video messages from distinguished Mr. Pascal Lamy, former Director General of the World Trade Organization and Chair of Paris Peace Forum, Ambassadors Boris Ruge, Vice Chairman of the Munich Security Conference, and Martin Reiser, the World Bank's Country Director for China, Mongolia, and Korea, as well as three visionaries from the Global Young Leader Dialogue, Ms. Theresa Tse, Sino-Biopharmaceutical, Mr. Noah Fraser, Canada-China Business Council, and Mr. Joshua Dominic, Cranking Through China. The Global Young Leader Dialogue is now officially launched, and its main vision is to nurture a network of young opinion leaders that will strive to cooperate together in responding to global challenges for the benefit of communities worldwide. This initiative is directly supporting the UN Sustainable Development Goals as one major global initiative, including the goal to reduce poverty. China in particular has made enormous progress in this area, effectively eradicating absolute and regional poverty across China. Today's event follows up and exemplifies yesterday's big visionary speeches. We meet today on the topic of fostering global cooperation in response to global challenges. My name is Martin Geiger, and it is my pleasure and great honor to moderate today's webinar. We will hear from some of the most distinguished and also most interesting young leaders who will share their wealth of insights, perspectives, and recommendations with us. Globally, young leaders have become a force to reckon with in public policy discourse concerning global governance. The 2020 pandemic poses unprecedented challenges to China and the world. Young opinion leaders must be prepared for the big unknowns of 2021 and the next years to come. Before we start our discussion, we will briefly introduce the Global Young Leader Dialogue by means of a video clip.
Just explodes. It's very, very terrifying.
This will not be the last pandemic.
We should stress that stronger multilateralism and global cooperation can constitute a very solid foundation that will enable the international community to tackle current and future problems, no matter what they are.
That youth is mobilizing for global challenges and wants to play an active role in reshaping global cooperation.
If we think about the role of the young people, it will be very vital for them, together with the government, corporate, and civil society, to discuss, brainstorm, and come up with some revolutionary ideas on how to meet the Sustainable Development Goals and at the same time continue the economy growing and having the prosperity of the people increased.
Innovations in policy, science and technology will be needed to mitigate climate change, but in itself this will not be enough. Societies will need to develop new ways to build and benefit from international engagement and multilateral cooperation. Trade and international exchange will need to adapt and then further fuel innovation. But young people can support this through their studies, their work, companies that they own, or in government.
I'm confident the young leaders today are already making a difference, but of course there's potential for much more. They can help raise the awareness about the need for us to have the solid foundation provided by multilateralism and collaboration.
Global Young Leader Dialogue is giving youth a chance to articulate their needs and exchange ideas to build back an improved post-COVID world.
Global Young Leader Dialogue is a unique opportunity for people from different backgrounds and different countries to come together and discuss those topics and come to some reasonable and meaningful solutions.
We believe the Global Young Leader Dialogue program is a very positive thing because it can help facilitate a mutual understanding between young leaders from different backgrounds.
Global Young Leader Dialogue is a great opportunity for new insights about how we can harness the energy and the commitment of the global youth to make a real difference.
Global Young Leader Dialogue will provide a platform for you to build bridges between East and West, to become a leader of tomorrow. Use your voice and use your actions. Join the ride.
I support Global Young Leader Dialogue.
I support the Global Young Leader Dialogue.
I support Global Young Leaders Dialogue.
I'm a firm supporter of the Global Young Leader Dialogue.
Sostengo il programma Dialogo Globale Giovane Legge.
Support Global Young Leader Dialogue.
Apoio o programa de diálogo global de líderes jovens.
I support Global Young Leader Dialogue.
Je soutiens la dialogue des jeunes talents globaux.
Big visions and big visions are needed following this challenging year that we have nobody has foreseen. But now the work should also start, and let's start our discussion. I ask all panelists to keep it sharp and neat, a maximum 5 minutes, please. And I'm gonna start and introduce Mr. Andrei Filipov. Andrei is Executive Director of the Moscow office and board member of the Dialogue of Civilizations, DOC, an important think tank. Drawing on your insights, Andrei, how can global youth cooperation and global cooperation in general be revitalized and strengthened following the pandemic? Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin. I would like to start with definitions. In my view, it's extremely important to understand what we would like to see beyond the leaders. I would like to propose the 3 definitions or 3 stages. First of all, it's common people who usually not interested in anything. It's kind of the people who prefer just to consume something around. The second stage, I can say, what is a kind of leaders who understand the best practices around the world and would like to disseminate them. And the best leaders is the leaders who follow the new ideas, who generate them, who innovate them. From my point of view, it's extremely important to focus on this last stage, when we can collect the people who has new innovative ideas, because it's not possible to follow a new sustainable agenda without new ideas. And talking about the leaders, we also should understand what kind of values they have, because we remember what values of exclusivity or dominations which guided most of our history ended very dead, and probably we should also consider what new leaders they should follow kind of the dialogue between different cultures, between different economic situation. Because if you leader and you focus only on yourself, it will not work and not work for your community. New leaders, they definitely should focus on most weak point in society, and they go to this point and to try to solve this problem, not to generate our power. And we should go to these kind of things and collect them. And after that, we can do much better and we can solve a lot of the problems around the globe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrei. Большое спасибо. Andrei is joining us today from Moscow. Our next distinguished panelist is Ms. Eva Yang, Chief Representative of the Academic Youth Seminar of Sunland Education. Eva, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Eva. It's really great to be with you today. I work for Sunland, which is an online education group in China. Our specialty is providing online education program for adults in China. For example, a graduate degrees program with partner universities included in the United States and Australia. So I focus on academic seminars, teaching, training, and business environment. It's really great to be with you today. So let me address the first part of the question first. So when we're talking about the pandemic has posed many challenges for global community, like the poverty reduction. So for my opinion, like access to the quality education is definitely an important factor to reducing poverty. Because like we all say, right, education is the only way out. And I realized the access to the quality education or even education at all, it's not for everyone. It's not easy for many people, especially during the COVID, as we all know, it has made this traditional education very challenging, as many countries are still being hit hard by COVID. We are just lucky to be in China now, like everyone is really back to school. Just a while ago, I believe everyone's heard the news, like even at the state, the internet was saying like the school closure, giving people a panic, or for like people, we start to worry at the youth. We start to worry about our kids if the pandemic coming up again, like how do we provide them the best education at all? Because it not even mentioned like the school closing down and the kids just staying home, they're not doing anything. So this is, for my opinion, this is the equality very inequity, because if the school are like really, like, let's say you have a laptop, you have the Wi-Fi, you can do online education, there's no problem at all. But for a lot of people, they probably couldn't afford a laptop, they probably don't have a Wi-Fi at home, like they can't even having the access to do the online education. So that's increased this education inequity. So this is a significant challenge we need to address, or else we face a very deepening the gap between we have or we have not. Now let me address the next part of taking my own side into this sector of society. As I introduced earlier, so I actually work in an online education business. So we know a lot about online education. We did a lot of volunteer work. So we want to help this world. We want to help China to have a better education for the people who don't have access to the online education. We have a really mature business module. But the problem is, like a few weeks ago, I actually went to the Sichuan in China, and that takes like forever to get there. That's first of us. And then not every teacher, not every students have the access through a laptop. So we have to like donate 1,000 of the computer there and then help them to set up the Wi-Fi. And then that's when we even train the teachers to have be very experienced teacher to do the online education. So often our students want to have more advanced degree like MBA, but for my students, our students, most of students, they have very professional jobs. Like I mentioned earlier, they're adults, they have a decent job already, like accountants, work in marketing and so on. But they usually have one thing in common: limited time to go to an offline program. Essentially, if they have a degree from a foreign university. So I guess my point here is we have a lot of ways. I mean, online education is not a new topic. A lot of institutions, they do that. But the problem I think we need to discuss, and I would like to raise this question for you all, is how do we help all those a rural area, how do we make them to have the access to even to the online education? So that's my speech today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was great, and we have already a few discussion points from both panelists now, and we continue. And our list of distinguished leaders also includes Mr. Markus Herrmann. Markus is the Director of European Research at Synolytics, and the floor is yours. And same question also, how to strengthen cooperation following the pandemic.
Thank you very much for introducing. I would like to thank CCG for bringing us together. It's actually quite an impressive international context. Also, thank you, Martin, for moderating this. I would like to appreciate CCG's work also in particular with all the trade policy discussions and BRI related discussions that you have brought together stakeholders to discuss. I would like to touch the question from three aspects. First one is on SDGs. The last thing I did before joining was I read through the SDGs again. I was asking myself where I'm actually contributing most. And then one project that I'm supporting, which is actually a possibly scalable economic development solution in Cambodia called Smiling Gecko, very noteworthy that I'm supporting. That was the first thing that came to my mind when I read then SDG 1, which is about ending poverty. My mind linked to the 14th five-year plan, which basically is not just any 14th five-year plan in the Chinese logic. It's about basically eradicating poverty in a formal sense, and then basically moving to modernization of China. So it's a noteworthy point in time. Then also when I read from SDG 2 to 17, I think one thing that I note is basically if we want to tackle these SDGs ultimately, and I'm going to list a couple of attributes, it's an analytical, it's a cooperative, it's a multilateral, it's a cross-system, cross-cultural, multi-stakeholder effort. So it's a big challenge. And then I would like to pivot into the challenges and uncertainty. So I think generally speaking, and everyone knows that multilateralism is weakened, strategic trust, wealth distribution, pandemic health, identity, some of the points Eva and Andre have already mentioned. I would like to mention three maybe hopeful examples. Three things. Climate, I think there was just a UN Ambition Summit, so we had pledges from all the different leaders. Hard to judge, I'm not an expert in this field, but I think the political momentum is rebuilding. Second topic is trade, in particular in the Corona time. Everyone talks about supply chain diversification, nearshoring, protectionism. What does dual circulation mean in the Chinese policy context? I think it's going to be important to be reminded that trade is not a zero-sum game or basically arena, but it still needs alignment on trade rules, which is very important. And I think RCP is a very encouraging sign for global trade, that basically the Asia Pacific is able to pull this together. And what I will be watching is whether the EU and China will actually get the CAI done, so the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment. And then a third, hopefully hopeful example in my mind is technology, which is a more difficult arena of cooperation. There's FDI mechanisms, export controls, competition for standard setting, ethical boundaries, all questions are there. Nonetheless, I see some commonalities across big blocks in the world. So basically big tech and anti-monopoly efforts are being intensified. There's also strengthening of data protection per se. And then one example that I particularly paid attention to is that, for instance, the Guangdong province is cooperating in S&T still with multiple US states, despite the overarching tension that are there. And then basically, just leading to the last topic I wanted to address is speaking about us, because I think in the end, it's also global young leaders. So the question to me is, who are we, right? Who are these leaders and how many of them do you need, and what features do these leaders actually have? I would basically differentiate two types. I think one type is we need leaders that are more on the systemic, strategic side, that because it's a mind-boggling challenge, and at the same time we just need to have very impactful people in their specific domains, probably contributing to a subset of a sub goal of one SDG goal. But I think the common features, and I'll end on this one, that I think all these leaders need to have in my mind is basically I think we all need to be analytical, because without analysis, we will work on the wrong priorities. I think we need some type of system level thinking. So it's not something that you can do just by doing what you have been doing. And then I think we need to be interdisciplinary. I think leaders will be impactful if they know multiple sectors. We've heard it before: government, civil society, private sector. I think it's we need to appreciate all of them. And in the end, Andre has also mentioned it, which I think is important, is also about interests and values. I think ideally these leaders are aligned with their interests to the agenda. And then in the end, the values also have to be constructive in what we're trying to accomplish here. So I'll end on this note. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think also this point you raised about foresight and also knowledge and studying in a way and analytics, I think is really important. I think we come back to this definitely later on again. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Mr. Reza Aliyev, whom we already know a bit from previous video clip, and he's Policy Development and Implementation Manager at BP, Deputy Secretary General at the Nizami Ganjavi International Center, and also a Schwarzman Scholar. Reza, please share your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Martin. First of all, I would like to thank Center for China and Globalization and Academy of Contemporary China and World Studies for this amazing opportunity and this amazing platform. In terms of the timing for global cooperation, there can't be a better timing if you think about it, as we celebrate the 5-year of Paris Agreement last Saturday. And as we head into the 2021 with post-pandemic, hopefully post-pandemic world, we can see that it is the year of, if there is one year where sustainability should be on the top of our priorities and top of our agenda, is next year. And in terms of the hopes, it's very high as well. We have 3 very big meetings happening next year, from biodiversity meeting in Kunming in China in May to food summit in September, and with climate change summit in the UK with COP26. It's going to be very important. And as we go to that, we think about also the last few months when more and more countries have started committing to the sustainability and committing to net zero. I think the biggest news was when China, President Xi Jinping committed to getting China to net zero by 2060. And right now, if you think about it, it's still not enough of the countries on the list that are committed, so only 9. But hopefully in 2021, there will be many more countries coming along. When we think about COVID of this year, it was very interesting. As we talk about cooperation, there were 2 sides of the cooperation and anti-globalization in a way. Countries, rather than getting more globalized and more regionally cooperating, started thinking much more about their national agenda. They started closing their borders. They started thinking about how they can buy more vaccines and so on. So it was a bit of a kind of a backlash in terms of the global cooperation. But what we saw on the other hand, as Marcus mentioned, where the supply chain has done miracles. We saw an amazing cooperation in shifting. There was a bit of the lack of products, around the world, kind of as the wave was going through. But it all fixed itself, and it was very mind-blowing to see that. In terms of the common cooperation in medicine, the way that we managed to get the vaccines working, it's a very big miracle and a very big achievement, which we should celebrate and learn from. When we look at the new actors and we look at the this year and next year, we see some new actors which were not there before, right? So if before the agenda for sustainability was driven by the civil society and backed up by some governments, right? And we saw some investors now starting to shift their investment policies. We saw an amazing letter to the companies, to the CEOs of the companies by Larry Fink last year, the head of BlackRock, in terms of putting the sustainability into their criteria of investment. We saw even Pope Francis a few weeks ago driving the initiative for sustainability, which is, when you think about it, a year ago, it would be very unusual in a way. But at the same time, the youth has been very, very young, from Greta Thunberg to all the way to on different levels of the voices that we could hear has been very incredible. When we look at the 2021 and we look at the post-pandemic, hopefully, world, we see that the cooperation is the heart where how we can drive the SDGs. And as Eva mentioned, the continuous education and awareness of people and of youth, first of all, and as Marcus mentioned about the passion and about the 2 types of the young leaders, there should be the awareness, and people would need to educate themselves about the Sustainable Development Goals and what we need to overcome this crisis. But at the same time, there should be the passion, there should be the heart, into that as well. But the path won't be very easy to go, because if you think about the next years, the youth will have to face few challenges, and we need to be aware of that. So there won't be much of the face-to-face meetings happening next year, which is a very big important part of building those bridges, building those bonds. The recession and the employment problems will be there. So unfortunately, we'll have to figure those things out ourselves and the next generations. But I have very high hopes. And again, as I said, the momentum is there. And as we speak right now and early next year, it's going to be very important to keep our energy together. And as Global Young Leaders Dialogue, we can continue and have a wider impact into that agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great and visionary. I'm sure we also come back here to many of your points. And also, it's my pleasure to welcome Timo Gerrit Blank. He's the partner and CEO of Agora Strategy Group. Timo, herzlich willkommen. What are your insights and what would you recommend to strengthen global cooperation?
Thanks, Martin. Thank you very much also for the kind introduction. And yeah, well, great pleasure to be here. Great pleasure to have this sharp and important discussion with you. And also, of course, many thanks to Tina and her team and the CCG for setting it up. And also many thanks for actually putting poverty on panel discussions like that one, because it's, I think, not self-evident in times of the pandemic to think about, well, poverty in general and take the issue up on the agenda. So what I'm doing, so that you can understand my context, Agora Strategy is a global strategic political advisory firm. Basically, we work all around the globe. We're funded or founded, let me say it like that, among others, a strategic arm of the Munich Security Conference, where we outgrow from them, but still work kind of in cooperation partner. So that's my background and, of course, my view on this issue. So how to reduce poverty, how to address it, and how to actually give an answer which is concrete to your very broad question, which is important, but of course it's hard to grasp. And I'm sure each and every one of you are struggling a bit maybe to give an answer on its own. And of course it's always an individual answer. So I think it's on the first SDG goal of the UN for a very good reason, because it's very general, and poverty, I mean, has many dimensions and addresses people on very different levels, not only people, but also countries. So it's a hard goal to achieve, and it's very hard to leave actually poverty if you're in it. And thereby, I perfectly understand that's a different thing to be poor in industrialized country like Germany, or also a country like China, than it is for anybody who is born into a country which is among the least developed 30 countries in the world. So how to deal with it? And the pandemic, of course, doesn't make this easier. And the things I heard in the discussion before, I think important points were already mentioned, like, for example, vaccine development, but also vaccine distribution among countries, not that the richest 30 country club keeps everything for itself, but actually willing to provide knowledge, technical assistance, and being able to share it. Another point, and this is the one I specifically want to mention, is the point of good governance. I think this is something which I see in my daily work, be it with companies, be it with countries. I don't mean good governance in the sense that everybody has to comply with the notions and ideas of a modern Western democracy. That's not what I'm saying. What I concede as good governance means basically fighting corruption, fighting mismanagement, and creating an environment which is in a certain way transparent and gives a form of participation for the people. And this builds in the end an environment of trust. And I think this is something where everybody also in this round here, right hands on, can actually contribute. And wherever good governance or good governance standards needs to be met or needs to be strengthened, it's question of institution building. It's a question of applying actually to the standards which come along with it. And this is something which is also a question of agenda setting. And agenda setting is something which you as a forum, the CCG as a think tank, Agora Strategy as a company always can at least point the issue to and actually name the issues we're discussing about. And concretely, to address poverty in the least developed countries, it's not only, I think, the idea of rich countries spending money in those countries, which ends up wherever it ends up, but also, for example, initiate public-private partnerships. I think that actually Marcos mentioned some of these approaches before, but maybe you will pick on that in the discussion afterwards. And this is something which may work. It's usually could be a combination of think tanks, which brings on also different perspectives, like the perspectives represented here in this panel. Could be from education to hands-on, very concrete SME company assistance. So this is one dimension of it. And I think this is the point which is most likely also for young global leaders who now are until 45, which is kind of an age where I think you all already have achieved a great deal in life and have some influence, be it in science or wherever, but to put these things exactly on the agenda and define also your understanding of good governance standards, address this, and then put this on the on the discussions where you engage. And both in this environment, which is helpful, sorry for that, it's a busy day, and built an environment which is very trustful. And if there's trust in the state, if there's trust in the institution, people are actually more willing to work and engage and actually bring these things on the agenda and develop them further. I mean, there are many examples. You've made a few. Climate is, of course, something which is very relevant and relates to that discussion. Paris Summit was mentioned before. And I think this is also a question which cannot be solved by Europe, as it has often taken place in the past, but more in terms of a global society, but also a global society where, of course, China and Asia take over their responsibilities in contributing to those goals. And I think this is exactly why we have this discussion here in this panel. And so, yeah, happy to hear your thoughts on that, and congrats again for setting it up.
Thank you too much. Yeah, it's my pleasure, last but not least, to also welcome Mr. Pedro Robledo, and he's the head for Latin America at Pure Terra Ventures and former Undersecretary of Youth and Civic Organizations in Argentina, not Australia, Argentina. Sorry about that. Pedro, what are your suggestions? How to move forward following the pandemic?
Well, thank you all of you. It's super interesting what we have been listening to. As you said, I have been working in poverty issues the last 10 years in government, and now I'm working on the private sector in water, which is pretty intricate and pretty related with poverty issues. I would like to say is to put some facts on the table, like to put faces to the problem that we have to address. And women in sub-Saharan Africa spend 3-4 hours walking to gather water daily. These are little girls and mothers that they are not available to attend school, they are not available to work, and they are not available to do other daily stuff. 70% of the time of women, of their time and of women in sub-Saharan Africa is spent in trying to find these places in order to get water, something that for all of us is something that when we wake up, we turn on the tap and we have it for free. Almost like 400 million school days are lost each year because of water-related issues in the world. And about every 90 seconds, a mother loses a children to water-related illnesses. So it's pretty clear that if we don't tackle the water crisis that we are facing, the most affected are the poorest. But what is interesting is that the water crisis related to poverty is not ultimately about scarcity. It's about the management and governance of water and how we attract private investments into this management and governance of water. So this gives us hope because it means that innovation and attraction of private capital is key to tackle the problem. Also, we can find hope because in the last 2 decades, we halved the people without access to water. However, I will say that it's not only a problem for those living in low-income communities and in poverty. There is something that is it's a fact that for 2040, the world will suffer a shortage of 40% between water supply and water demand. And agriculture accounts for 70% of water, of the use of available water in the world. And we need water to produce energy, to produce food. So if we don't drive innovation in order to tackle the water crisis, it's almost it will be almost impossible to bring solutions to the table. And I think that this is what makes this the water crisis pretty interesting, because it's completely related to poverty, and governments and public institutions need to design public policies, to design programs in order to tackle the problem. But we will not be able to find solutions if we don't attract private investment into the water sector. What is also another fact that gives us hope is that, just to give an example, and last year, and Raymond James said in one of its research, says that the EBITDA multiples for water companies tend to lie within 10x and 12x, which is a pretty interesting investment for hedge funds and private investors. And the transaction trends in the water sector, 60% account in water scarcity. So I think that there is a lot of good signals regarding water. I think that what happened last week regarding that water will start to be traded in Chicago, we don't know where this will drive the water crisis. But for sure, we have to understand that behind water scarcity, we have millions of people not having the right to access to school, not having the access to work. And to give just a last example, like in Africa, we lose 40 billion hours of workforce every year. This is like the same amount of hours of the entire workforce time in France. So just because of water problem and issues. And can we imagine if we will invest in more strategic and more innovation in order to tackle the water crisis, not only in Africa, in Latin America, in South Asia, but also like cities in the developed world will face the day zero, right? And we can think about London, we can think about Miami, we can think about a country like Singapore, which are pretty developed countries, but they're facing day zero. So I hope that we can attract more private investments. We can attract more private investment in order to innovate, to bring more technologies, and by this be able to achieve SDG 6, which is completely related with SDG 3, with SDG 2, and at the end, water is life.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. And that brings us also to our discussion. And I was just thinking what you already did, a few of you. I just went through the SDGs and I think we have almost touched on each of them. No poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation, infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible communities and production, climate action, then life below water, life on land is mentioned, peace, justice and strong institutions was also mentioned, good governance, partnerships for the goals are stressed how important that is. And we talked about multi-sectoral and multilateral, multi-stakeholder partnerships, public-private, and so on. So I think we already touched on all these, on this whole list of many goals, which are, as we have seen, are so interconnected, right? And the water example is a very good example. The other example, let's say, I could bring up is now migration and mobility of people, and refugee movements is also everywhere across actually these SDGs. There's always a link, and I think we can find a lot of other topics that are so making these links and are everywhere basically in many of the SDGs mentioned. And I think if we perhaps start first, and I like that actually to start perhaps also thinking about leadership and what young leaders should bring and how they can start off getting engaged and getting actually involved. In many cases, we have to say get involved back again, because I think most of us are very active people, but a lot of young people are also really stuck in the pandemic, we have to say, and are disconnected now, stuck in other countries as well. I think it's really 2021 will be a push, or will be really important how to actually bring the voices of young people again to the forefront and actually motivate a lot of people again to take action. So I wondered in a way what your viewpoints are on that. Perhaps we start there. And I think gender equality is also an important aspect, because a lot of people have actually assumed again very traditional roles, right? Have quit their jobs to take care of their kids and elderly people, right? And it's very often women that do that. And I think we should also talk about some of these aspects. So who wants to start perhaps on young leaders and going forward, and these topics perhaps? Pedro, sorry.
So I would like to say that regarding young leadership and how we can get more involved, this is a good example of it. I think that the organization made by CCG, one of the most important think tanks in China and in the world, tackling current issues like globalization and organizing these kind of summits in a time that, as you said, like many young people are stuck in their countries, maybe, without having the chance to interact with other young people, with other leaders, with other sectors. This is key. I think it's important, but also I think that it's always important to highlight that we need to fight for those positions in power. I think that all young people are sometimes a little bit tired of being invited to the tables for the young people to give recommendation to who? To the old people? Why we don't have the young people into the decision table? Why we don't have more young people into parliaments? I would like to understand, for example, if we think, I don't know, let's say France, the United States, China, Argentina, Brazil, Poland, how many young people under 30 years old we have them in the executive power, in parliaments? And I think that that's a critical aspect, because when young people are not on a parallel table, when they are not in a parallel summit, when they are in the summit, when they are with those who take the decision, I think that our voices are not only here, our voices became reality. Our voices became public policies. Our voices became the real transformation that we need. So I think that for all the young people that are attending the summit, that they are watching us right now, I think the most important thing, maybe can sound a little bit cliche, but I truly believe that they should not stop and they should not be convinced that they can not access to the seats where decisions are taken. We have to fight for them. We need to understand where are those places where decisions are taken, and we need to go for that. I think that leadership is not something that we only will be learning in universities or in summits. Leadership is something that we have to do, that we need to become doers. So
yeah,
I think that's a critical aspect.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's really this risk also of certain fatigue, right, among a lot of people, not just young people, just general, and also affecting even also decision makers, right, after this very tough year. And one question we got actually from the audience is really connected to, Eva, what you were saying, and bringing actually this connection with young people and motivating them and keeping them motivated and making them possible to participate, is the role of technology, of new technologies actually, and young people, and how they can use these new technologies and perhaps also new business models to solve some of the global challenges. Yeah, please go ahead.
So as an online education teacher, I think I've a lot to say. I'm actually an English teacher myself, so I've been using those. We have a huge, great department, IT department. We designed this app that we allowed everyone in the world can using this live stream, and also like we designed this app can allow people to really participate in the class. So the problem with people, the students are taking in classes, they don't feel very motivated. They don't feel very entertainment. So we were talking about adults, they probably have a lot of self-discipline, but for a lot of let's say 10 years old, 15 years old kids, they don't want to sitting in front of the laptop for like 2 hours. There's no way to do that. So we have a lot of new technology to make it very interesting. We have the voting, we have giving a prize, we having a beautiful prose on the side, so to make it very cool. So I think that the technology, we are trying to help those apps to really attracting a lot of students to sitting in front of your laptop for like 2-3 hours without any problem. And the other thing, I know the question is about technology, but also the trained teacher really, really important in this part. Because I think relating to the question earlier, when you were asking how is the leader can do, I think really we need to train the teacher to be more experienced, and not that someone and you can just put out from a regular school. And the online teaching model and the offline teaching model, it's completely different. So we need to train the teacher. We need to have a really cool technology to make it happen.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. And I think education is also really connected to what Andre early on mentioned, and a few of you then also later mentioned, is actually really this aspect of education as well. And actually also differences, cultural differences that simply are there, exist, and we deal in our daily lives with it. And I think to also keep this open-mindedness, and this is needed actually, perhaps because we fell back in a year where we saw actually rise of nationalism. We saw also new tensions, global tensions across the world. And now perhaps even like a little fight, or not a little fight, perhaps a significant fight over the vaccines, access to vaccines. I just learned that Canada, for example, is oversubscribed 7 times its whole population, having bought so many orders across the world, and is leading the world in this aspect. So problematic, I think, the access to vaccines, and there is the risk simply that we fall back in a world that is again dominated by rising tensions between countries. So Andre, you have talked very early on about the need also to really stay open, and actually to, as a young leader, to also really be educated about this, and to try to balance this and to avoid actually these tensions. Can you talk a bit again about this?
Yes, my pleasure. I would like actually to focus on motivation side, because it's really very important, not only because of the COVID, but we can learn from our 20 years history, or maybe a little bit more, when the best brains in the world or best leaders, they was simply recruited in some let's say, paper work. I mean, everyone was dream about to be like investment banker or something like that. The people who not produce anything, they go to the markets and they make profit just from the computer, and that's all. And I think it's very important problem for current world, when we should provide some platforms for young leaders, for young innovative people who could present his ideas not only for business or for corporate side, but also from the social impact point of view. And I think this Global Young Leaders Dialogue and platform perfectly fit for this purpose. And also, I definitely should mention your project, Martin, which you did with CCG. It's about the global talent management, because it's also an important thing. We can see what most of the people who motivated to do something, they particularly focus it on some regions in the world. For example, maybe Europe, maybe United States, to go, to learn, to study, and to stay in these countries. And for example, a lot of the small regions like Central Asia, in Africa, and not only them, they have huge problem, which so-called brain drain. But I think from leaders' point of view, which are very connected, it's also extremely important how to keep people in the place when they could support the local communities, how motivate them to stay, how motivate them to provide his innovations not for profit but for public goods. Thank you.
Yeah, I think especially, I think we can come very quickly also to this point of what you mentioned with, brain drain and these issues that affected a lot of countries. And what we have seen during the pandemic is really that a lot of people frantically and managed to some part to return to their home countries, right? And also now we have seen countries that actually impose also limits now that not so many of their nurses or doctors should emigrate to keep it actually for the national kind of market to have these workers ready. On the other hand, we need mobility at some point again. And I think to overcome and to avoid tensions, I think it's the best tool is also really to have international student mobility, to have exchange again at some point, and to have this reinvigorated. But at the same time, I think from that point, if we think about global governance, I think it's really important that we try to start, if possible, really on another footing and try to avoid, again, having massive brain, and especially what was highlighted is actually also care drain. Right? So we became actually aware during the pandemic how much societies depend on global health professionals. If you look at Germany, how many doctors and nurses are actually German or have immigrated from other EU countries or from other countries outside the EU, right? We strongly depend actually on this resource, right? And I think there will be probably even a fiercer competition over these people. And I think if bringing in this point, I think global governance is very much needed also in this sector, and it affects all the other sectors, right? And from educational standpoint, however, it's also important to have mobility and exchanges again. And we can do a lot, I think, through video platforms. But I think at the end of the day, after 10 video Zoom meetings, I think we do not have the same experience and the same insight than we would have having traveled again or having met someone again, and perhaps just occasionally out in the plane or wherever, right? And having just this random talk and having met someone in a new perspective. I think it's important. What was also mentioned, Marcus, yeah, exactly. I'm not sure if it's perhaps the same point, but you stressed the point of analytics and actually going forward to also study and develop a foresight. I was wondering if we can talk a bit about that, but I'm also listening to you because you wanted to bring something in as well. Yeah, so please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. That was pure coincidence. Well, thank you already, and because I got some impact from some of the statements that have been made, I would like to just quickly pick up on a couple of points. One, I think, is the point of I think Pedro mentioned it. at least there's a framework which I like a lot in the corporate context. You will use it. You talk about position power versus knowledge power. So if someone has actually position power, then an ideal tandem is if someone in position power is basically using someone who has knowledge power to be an effective combination. And I think any think tank like CCG is also doing it, has position power, and is basically trying to elevate voices. That's one thing. And then I wanted to follow up also on a point that Pedro was making on the private sector, because in my mind, I think there's a lot of problem solving, analytical expertise in a lot of disciplines. From, I think water is one example, engineering, there's climate science, etc. What I think is a difficulty, and I'm not saying that I have the solution, but that's one observation I have from my vantage point, is that those people who know the methodology and have the analytics are sometimes, it's a bit generalizing, but or they need to have full appreciation of the private sector's role. Because it's only in combination with the private sector and understanding, being able to speak to financial investors, being able to communicate to them effectively, that in the end you can actually drive solutions. And if I translate that again to, let's say, policymakers, and probably Pedro is a perfect example because he used to be in government, a policymaker will have the right vantage point because he looks at it from a systemic perspective. An entrepreneur does not necessarily have that because he will possibly be on a micro level. It could be, but his solution could be should be maybe linked to the public policy. So basically, what I think is in all the solution searching, one of the success factors is the ability that business people are able to speak to policy people and vice versa, and both need to hone a skill set, a basic skill set of the other, of the partner of the other side. And of course, you can call it public-private partnership, yes. But I think in the end, you can boil it down to skills. Is actually a policymaker able to speak financial terms? But is actually an entrepreneur able to speak policy terms and look from a community or even from a global government perspective? So I see a lot. Yeah. If there was one thing that I would try to do is try to bring these communities together and let them learn from one another. Thank you.
Yeah, great, excellent. I think, Timo, you mentioned also Agora and the connection, also Munich Security Conference and these platforms. And I think a couple of things Marcus just mentioned really spoke to what you were also saying. Perhaps I bring you in now.
Yeah, well, thank you both very much. Yeah, I actually have the same thought, and I think Marcus and I share quite some few ideas. Maybe because Bavaria and Switzerland are so close together, but maybe because it's I think just the right way to go to. I wanted to pick up very briefly, Martin, a few things you mentioned before. This was the distribution of vaccines and the fight for it, and Canada overbuying. I think this is something this is very, very symptomatic and reflects a point of geostrategic rivalry which increases between different blocks and continents and countries in the world. And of course, what we see in the moment is a transition from a more unilateral, determined world of the last decades to multi-power centers. And this comes, of course, always with a price. But I think this is something which is essential, and you all touched several dimensions of that, of interaction and further exchange. But this is something which should happen peaceful and in close coordination, and also exactly in the way what Marcus mentioned and raised before, in terms of public-private partnerships and the different change of perspective, and also not only culturally between nations, but also in terms of the business, the different branches we partly represent, be it policy making, be it business, being diplomacy. And at this point of geostrategic change is something which will go with us for the next 20 to 30 years. And everybody here in the panel is the generation which will actually shape this transition process. And so I just want to strengthen and encourage you all to bear that in mind and actually build bridges and not cut them off, because it's going to be crucial.
Yeah, I think the building bridges
is a big picture, but I think the point is still valid. And with Christmas approaching, maybe sometimes you look a bit larger in your horizon. Martin, back to you.
Yeah, the building bridges. I mean, Andrej spoke very early on about this as well, and a lot of you brought it up, right? And I think the big challenge also of this how to make this work, right? And I think we are a bit like also affected by this. Yeah, I mean, let's say in the area of migration governance or in a lot of development, the same, and in a lot of areas, we have actually tried. We saw the global community trying over decades to find actually better answers to address some of the challenges, right? There has been the UN Global Compact on Migration just ratified just before the pandemic struck. We have several topics that actually also development, the climate change talks and so on, right? We had a lot of building blocks, and then the pandemic came, and I'm very interested now actually how to these building blocks actually get unpacked again. And there is the risk, and I see that also, and I think Timo, that was an excellent remark, right? Because there is this risk now that we have also these rivalries again, and I think it's very important that we have these forums. And it's online right now, and we have a lot of, and it's good that they are building up. And I think going forward, 2021, have more in-person or hybrid formats, I think is crucial to actually keep that momentum, to also give life again to a lot of these treaties and agreements and corporations that we already have, but actually have to relaunch, and perhaps as youth leaders, try to relaunch it also in a much more just humane and other ways than perhaps before, right? So I think that's important. One question that comes actually from the media, I wanted to tell you, and it's actually something that, yeah, we have kind of addressed it, but not yet concretely enough. So I'm reading it to you. What is the impact of the epidemic on the investment and financing possibilities of youth innovation and entrepreneurship? I think it's a huge question, because we see around the globe, a lot of countries are in public debt, soaring public debts. Other countries, sending countries, for example, of international students and migrant workers, have the issue as well that they have seen an absolute reduction of the remittances of these money flows going back to this country. So I think across the world, a common issue is really also lacking public finances now. And public finances most of the time were actually really used to also promote entrepreneurship, the education of young people, and so on. What do you think about this question? What will be happening, and how can we make sure that there is enough support?
Is it addressed to me, Martin? Can I answer that question?
Yeah, Risa, yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. So I think it's going to be very important. The impact of the pandemic and especially in the post-pandemic world, will be very different. The government, based on their financial capabilities, have spent a lot of money on keeping people, furloughed, trying to get the unemployment postponed to next year as much as possible. So the private investments will be very, very important in that regard. But when we look at it when I look at it from next year, I look at it more optimistic, because if you think about the crisis, it's also an opportunity, and it actually will push, I think, if we look back at 2008 crisis, like the world financial crisis, a lot of the things which we're using now, be it, Ubers of, Airbnbs and so on, came to, were created because people lost their employment, and then they had to, utilize their cars, they had to utilize their houses and extra rooms and so on. So I'm quite optimistic that we will, humanity and human brain is amazing, and we'll come up with some really amazing things which will transform and change the world. And in terms of the, for example, the crowdfunding technology, because people will be having that. I think there are two factors. The government, once the pandemic is over and the economies will open up, they will use their last kind of firepower in terms of really boosting the economy and making the SMEs, especially the small and medium enterprises, boost. At the same time, people who have been saving, for example, or so on, there will be a lot of crowdfunding opportunities to invest into some really great technology and education that Eva mentioned. And if I may add just one other comment to your previous question with regards to and to Pedro's actual comment with regards to having more young voices, I would say that in my mind, there are two important words. I wouldn't say it's just youth which is important. I would say that there are two things that we should be working on, no matter whether it's the state level or if it's the international, regional, global level, or even in our communities or in our companies. It's diversity and it's trust, rebuilding trust. I think for the past 2-3 years, we've lost trust, but be it on the international level with certain countries not liking each other and so on, or on the regional level, or on the corporate level. At the same time, the continuous education, we saw that the education, it doesn't stand just, before we would just learn certain skills and then we'd use it for 30, 40 years of our career. Right now, we see with the digitalization, it's moving, but also it kind of also hinders the trust. You can see a bit of, again, everyone wants to be digital, everyone wants to be technologically educated, but then you see the lack of trust of the older population, let's say older employees, for example, looking at the younger employees saying, okay, so why there's this ageism, why there is this trend to, have more young people, So I think the diversity, be it age, we should have the voices there, be it the countries, when we discuss some global issues, there should be some small island countries as well with their voices being heard, because those are the ones which will be affected the most. Or it has to be, the gender equality. You mentioned that very briefly, Martin. I would really have loved to have, like more female representatives here, and if we, and so on in the conversations, in discussions. Be it, different mindsets, different points of view are very, very important to be heard and to be discussed. I think the monotonous, let's say, like middle-aged white men mentality should be moving away to something further and different.
Thank you so much. And you mentioned time. I mentioned something else to you. We have currently 270,000 people watching our live stream in both English and Chinese. So we had a great, actually attendance here. Unfortunately, we come already to the closing, and I thought to give each one of you like 2 sentences, very difficult, but like 2 sentences of some kind of vision you may have for the next year, what should happen. Like you can call it, depending on faith and so on, your Christmas wish or the end of the year wish or whatever you want. So perhaps we start with Andrei.
Thank you very much. I wish what we will have much more platform, this kind like global young leaders dialogue, because we definitely need them. We need a lot of them, especially in emerging markets and emerging countries, to have new solutions. And I wish what we can cooperate in between of all this platform, and we can unite the truly innovative leaders who can solve the real problem and achieve sustainable development goals.
Great. Thank you. Marcus.
I'll be quick. I'll pick up on something that Timo mentioned with the geostrategic situation. I think it's very important to be cognizant that anything we want to get accomplished, we need to understand interests of actors, of companies, of nations, of anyone. So basically my closing word would be, let's all be aware of the interest, but let's inject a little bit of idealism and then basically drive towards the, it's more than zero sum. Thank you.
Eva.
So once again, what I was want to emphasizing is we don't let any people left behind, despite you're rich and you're poor, and we want to make sure everyone has access to education. And let's just do everything we can as a young leader in the world to make this world a better place.
Pedro.
The pandemic made the rich richer and the poor poorer. I think that that's something that we should not forget. And I think that also we should keep in mind that it's important to allow like innovation and technological advancement and this kind of companies that are innovating in the world.
Yeah.
But it's, I think, the political systems at the end who should decide how to organize our societies too. And I think when it comes to water, that's a key aspect, because if we let, for example, the water issue only into the hands of finance or private capital, then that could drive to lack of accessibility for many millions of people.
Thank you very much. Timo.
So thank you very much. So then I hope that we can translate actually the strategic discussion, the theoretical aspects we discussed, in hands-on action and concrete steps that we actually can implement, address the issues we talked about, and then meet again in person in 1 or 2 years and see how far we have come until then. And I mean, understanding interest, what Marcus just mentioned, I just want to re-emphasize that, build a bridge around that, and keep it going.
Absolutely, thank you. Risa, 1 minute.
I'll be very brief. I think there's a beautiful quote which I really like by Marshall McLuhan, which says, "On spaceship Earth, there are no passengers, we're all crew." And I really wish that all of us will go, and 270,000 people who are watching us will become the crew of the spaceship Earth and go and drive positive changes in their own sectors.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have to close this highly engaging, valuable discussion at this point because we're running out of time. But of course, the Global Young Leader Dialogue continues and has now been set in motion. And I like everyone to stay committed on this spaceship and continue working with us, and look forward to many more meetings, and also in person or hybrid or whatever, and really truly bring forward global cooperation. I'd like to thank again the Center for China and Globalization to have brought us together today for this important global conversation. And I'd like to especially thank our distinguished 6 panelists today: Risa Aliyev, Timo Gerrit Blank, Andrei Filipov, Marcus Herrmann, Pedro Robledo, and Eva Yang. Thanks for participating today, and thanks to our many viewers and attendees across the world joining us today. Let's stay connected and work together for strengthening global cooperation and moving forward. I wish everyone to stay healthy and safe. Have a good start into a hopefully much better year. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.